Rasulullah ﷺ tells us in a long hadith about the story of the soul when it leaves the body, the trip that the soul takes. He says, when the believer is dying, the angels come down with a coffin from Jannah and some scent from Jannah. And they descend and they sit in front of that person. And then the angel of death descends and tells the believer, be happy and pleased with the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you. And then he calls the soul to come out. He says, Ya ayyuhat al-ruh al-mutma'inna, oh you soul in the state of tranquility, come out to the pleasure that will be provided to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that soul would come out so easily. It is like a drop of water that is flowing down from a jug. Like pouring a drop of water. It slides so easily out of the body. And as soon as the angel of death takes that soul, all of the angels would jump. Every one of them wants to take the honor of holding that soul and wrapping it in the coffin. And then they would carry it up in the heavens. And Rasulullah ﷺ says, whenever they would carry it next to a group of angels, they would smell this beautiful scent. And they would say, whose soul is this? And the angels will tell them, this is the soul of so-and-so. They would call him with his best names. Until they reach to the gates of the lowest heaven. And then they would seek permission. So the gates of that heaven will open up. And whenever this soul is being carried through a heaven, the angels of that heaven will accompany it until the next heaven. And angels are surrounding this soul all the way up until it reaches to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deliver the promise of Jannah to that soul. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, take that soul back to earth, because that is where I've created them from, and that is where they would return, and that is where they would be resurrected from. So the soul would then descend down with honor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us what happens to the soul of the non-believer, or the evil doer. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, the angels come down with a coffin from hellfire. And they come next to him, and the angel of death would stand next to him and say, Ya ayyatuha ar-ruh al-khabitha, oh you evil soul, come out to the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His anger. So that soul would disperse around the body and try to cling to every nerve and muscle. It doesn't want to leave. So the angel of death is pulling that soul out. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says the pain of that soul is like a branch filled with thorns being pulled out of a wet ball of wool. Imagine pulling out a branch filled with thorns out of a wet ball of wool. It is tearing apart the nerves and the muscles of that person. Pain and agony of death. And as soon as that soul comes out, all of the angels would jump and would wrap it up in a coffin from hellfire, and then they would carry it up. Rasulullah ﷺ says it has a stinking, rotten smell. And whenever this soul passes next to angels, they would start cursing it and they would say, whose soul is this? So the angels would call him with his worst name. And then the angels would carry it up to the first heaven, as-sama ad-dunya, the lowest heaven, and they would seek permission. But the door of that heaven will not open. لا تفتح لهم أبواب السماء. The doors of the heavens will not be open for them. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, throw that soul to the lowest earth. Throw that soul down to the lowest earth. So that soul will be thrown down with the disgrace by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the soul is in the grave. As soon as a person gets into the grave, two angels, Munkar and Nakir, would descend on that person. And they would scream at him, and they would shock that person and surprise him. Meaning that the way of conversation with these two angels is not very, sort of to say, polite. They're very tough and strong. And they expect from you a straight answer immediately. Whether you are a believer or not, they're going to come in that fashion. So these two angels will come down, Munkar and Nakir. And they would ask three questions. Man Rabbuk? Wa ma dinuk? Wa man nabiyuk? Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who's your prophet? Only 3 questions. This is the examination. This is the test. This is the test we should prepare for. And this test has only 3 questions in it. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? And who is your prophet? 3 questions. And they expect from you straightforward, immediate answer. The believer would say, Rabbi Allah, my Lord is Allah. And my religion is Islam. And my prophet is Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. They would hear a sound coming from above, saying, قَدْ صَدَقَ عَبْدِي, my servant is telling the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is verifying the answers. The angels are asking the questions, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is verifying if the answers you're saying are the truth or not. And that is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran,
يُثَبِّتُ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets firm the believers on the firm statement in this world. And what is the firm statement? La ilaha illallah. That is the firm and established statement. That is the truth. That is the reality. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will set the believer firm on La ilaha illallah. With the non-believer or the munafiq, the angels would come down and they would say, who's your Lord, what's your religion, and who's your prophet? When they would ask him about the prophet, they would say, what? I don't know. I heard the people say this and I said it. They would smash him with a hammer that will turn him into dust. That person is saying what he heard. I don't know, but I heard people say this about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I heard Abu Jahl say this about him. I heard Abu Lahab. I heard ABC News. I heard CNN. I read in the newspaper. That's not the answer the angels want to hear from you. They want to hear from you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is my Nabi. After the questioning of the believer, when the believer is given the right answers, a voice calls from the heaven, and صَدَقَ عَبْدِي, my servant is telling the truth. فَافْرِشُوا لَهُ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَأَلْبِسُوهُ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَافْتَحُوا لَهُ بَابًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. So furnish his grave from paradise, and provide him with clothes from paradise, and open for him a gate to paradise. This grave on earth is hooked up to Jannah, is directly connected to paradise. This grave in dunya of the believer, it has a direct connection to Jannah. There's a gate, and this person in the grave is able to see his place in Jannah. He's not able to go there, but he can see it. And then a very handsome person would walk in the grave. Very pleasant face. So the dead person would say, who are you? That person would say, I am your good deeds. And I came to spend time with you and be with you until the day of judgment. I will be with you. You're not going to be alone. And then Rasulullah ﷺ says, he will have a window showing paradise, and a window showing hellfire. And he will be told, this is where you could have been if you were not a believer, in hellfire. And this is what you've got because of your iman. When he sees that, he would say, Ya Rabb, aqim as-sa'a. Oh Allah, start the day of judgment. When he sees what's waiting for him in Jannah, he says, oh Allah, bring the day of judgment, حَتَّى أَذْهَبَ إِلَى مَالِي وَأَهْلِي, so that I can go to my family and to my wealth. Where is his family and wealth? Is it in dunya? His family and wealth now is in akhirah. He is not caring now about what he has left behind in this world. He doesn't want to go back to this world. He will not regret it. Now he's in a hurry. He wants to go to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has reserved for him in Jannah. Ya Rabb, aqim as-sa'a. Oh Allah, let the day of judgment start as soon as possible so that I can go and be with my family and my wealth. Al-kafir or al-fajr, the corrupt person, the evil person, or the non-believer. Rasulullah ﷺ says, after the questioning, يُنَادِي مُنَادٍ مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ أَنْ كَذَبْ. An announcement will be made from the heavens that he is a liar. فَأَفْرِشُوا لَهُ فِرَاشًا مِّن نَّارٍ وَأَلْبِسُوهُ لِبَاسًا مِّن نَّارٍ وَافْتَحُوا لَهُ بَابًا إِلَى النَّارِ. Furnish his grave from hellfire, and give him clothes from hellfire, and open for him a gate to hellfire. And then an evil, ugly looking person would come in the grave. So the man would say, who are you? What an evil person you are. He would say, I am your evil deeds, and I will be with you until the day of judgment. And he has a stinking, rotten smell that will be with him until the day of judgment. And then Rasulullah ﷺ says, two windows will be opened, a window to Jannah and a window in hellfire. He would be told, this is where you could have been if you were a believer. That's the regret. So he's not only suffering physically, but he's suffering psychologically because of regret. And this is where you will be in hellfire. He would say, Ya Rabb, la tuqim as-sa'a. Oh Allah, do not let the day of judgment start.